Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by Eric Maisel, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Effective communication is the cornerstone of strong family relationships. However, as life's complexities increase, miscommunication, misunderstandings, and unresolved conflicts can strain even the closest bonds. So, in this episode, we'll be exploring the relationship coaching and what it can do for communication in family relationships. And to guide us through this is diplomat coach Eric Maisel, who specializes in not just relationship coaching, but also creativity coaching and existential wellness coaching. So, hi, Eric. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Marie. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here as well. So, before we begin, tell us a bit about your background and what sparked your interest in coaching.
Well, I'm old enough to have a long background, so I'll try to be short. But I started out as a math and science boy. That's what I thought I was doing. I went to a math and science high school, one of the high-powered high schools in New York City. Graduated early and went to college too young at 16. And soon in college realized I was not interested in astrophysics at all, really. So I managed to flunk out. And then, having nowhere to go, I joined the Army. And after the Army, I had no idea what to do, so I got a degree in philosophy. You can tell this is going to be a long story, but I'll make it short. I started writing my first novel when I was 24, and I was a writer from 24 into my early 30s. I had a ghostwriting career. That wasn't making enough for our young family to live on. So I retooled and became a California licensed marriage and family therapist. So that was my first foray into therapy coaching, was as a licensed therapist. Very soon, I didn't believe in the model. I didn't believe I was diagnosing and treating mental disorders. I thought I was just dealing with folks with problems. So I didn't like the model, and we'll probably come back to that because that's important for coaches to understand. But at any rate, I segued into what I called creativity consulting. Coaching wasn't really a thing back then. This is 30 years ago or more. When coaching became a popular idea, I moved from creativity consulting to creativity coaching. And I've been working with creative performing artists for 30, 35 years now. Back then, I worked with art-related couples, couples where one person was a painter and the other person was a musician or what have you. Some of the hardest work you can do is working with artist couples because both want the other one to have the day job, both want the other one to bring in the money so they can do their own art. So it was a great learning experience to work with artist couples to begin with. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 odd years, is working as a creativity coach. I also have a lifelong interest in existentialism. I grew up right in that era where existential thought was big, where Camus and Sartre and those writers were popular. So, of course, existential wellness was on my radar from an early age. The idea that it's important that we know what matters. It's important that we answer our meaning needs and our life purpose needs. All of that has been important to me throughout my career. So it was natural to go into existential wellness coaching. And of course, as a marriage and family therapist, I've been interested in relationship issues for a long time. So I've been blending those three kinds of coaching into my version of coaching. I've created certificate programs in each of those three areas. And that's what I do. I train folks in those areas, and I work as a sort of a life coach for creatives is probably the best way to put it.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, first of all, imagine being like, imagine achieving a degree in philosophy just because you were bored, but also your long-standing career is highly impressive. But throughout the years of coaching, what have you found to be the biggest communication challenge within couples and or families?
Well, I'm not sure if there's one. Let me name a couple to get us started. One is our desire to take the sting out of what we say, so we start apologizing almost immediately after we've said something, which is why people often go on too long. They'll say the thing they want to say, and then they'll add clauses and more clauses and take the sting out of it. And by the time they're finished, the other person doesn't really believe what the other person has said. It's been so watered down or reduced that it has no efficacy, no power. So that inability to say things simply, straightforwardly is probably the main challenge, and it connects to safety issues. People often don't find it really safe to say something directly to their boss or to their mate or to their child. So they hem and haw and go around the bush. When I work with clients, I often invite them to say the things they mean to say in 7 words or fewer. If you can't say it in 7 words or fewer, then you're probably not being brave enough. And a simple example is, please stop that, as an example of how to be direct and clear, in a relationship. And most people have trouble saying things like, please stop that. They have to go the much longer route of, this is making me feel, et cetera, et cetera. Just please stop that, or that's not okay. So I think that's one of the main issues, is not being able to say things directly. Another issue, if to call it an issue, is not honoring that people are different. It's strange to say that. It should go without saying. It should be obvious, but I have a simple model of personality that's made up of 3 parts. That there's original personality, how we come into the world, and formed personality, and available personality. And those 3 parts, I think, make up us as human beings. And the original personality is what I'm speaking to here. And that's the idea that we come into the world already somebody. Anybody who's had kittens or puppies or kids knows that every creature is its own self already from birth, startles differently, sleeps differently, has a different worldview even from a very early age. And if when you communicate, you don't understand that your husband or wife is a different person, it's not just they may be a different religion or a different culture, it's deeper than that. They are their own person. And if you can't respect that and see that and honor that, there are going to be basic problems from the beginning that are going to endure through the relationship.
Yeah, for sure. I actually read something this morning as well that was similar to that, where this husband got divorced over, well, seemingly over dirty dishes, when in actuality, it was brewing for years and years because the dishes weren't done, and the wife felt like they had to take care of him, another child, and he felt like all of these issues were so petty, and over the years he didn't realize this, but he always regarded himself as someone who is better than her because he would never be bothered with these petty issues, and that really is the crux of the problem.
Yeah, that's right. And you've named another big challenge, and that is if the people are not on a level playing field, that's always going to play out in certain ways. And by the way, we'll probably end up in one of my pet territories, which is the authoritarian personality. I've done a lot of writing in that area and a lot of work in that area. And that's one of the issues that comes up in, I would say, between a quarter and a half of all families, all couples, that somebody is manifesting the personality traits of the authoritarian personality. That is, that somebody's being a bully. There's a lot of bullying in families. And um, it's hard for a child to understand what's going on. why they're being bullied or why their parents are acting intrusively or just cruelly, just being mean. Child doesn't understand, can't fathom why a parent would want to be mean. Why not be loving? Isn't that nicer than being mean? But there's an awful lot of bullying in families that the members of families have to understand and recognize and survive.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, I can't wait to get further into detail, but before that, let's break things up a little bit. This is the Have You Met section. And my first question for you is, what is your favorite book?
I don't have one, but I have a category of book, and that's existential fiction. And that would include the novels of Dostoevsky and Camus and Orwell and Kafka. If I had to pick a book, it would be Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. He was the first really psychologically and existentially acute author. And I was already reading, as a child, I was reading the Russian greats because they spoke to me. So I'll go with Crime and Punishment, although you could twist my arm and I might go with Kafka's The Trial or Orwell's Animal Farm or Camus' The Fall.
That's amazing. And what do you like about existential fiction?
It's the opposite of genre. That is, these are rounded human beings who have a psychological reality. In genre fiction, I mean, I like hard-boiled detective fiction, but nothing's going on in that person's head. It's just how fast can he drive his car and how fast can he shoot and what have you. A lot of fiction, a lot of writing is like that. There's no real internal life, no interior life to the characters. And the characters in genre fiction are typically not trying to figure out life's big questions for themselves. They're just doing whatever the genre asks them to do, falling in love or being an action hero or what have you. So it's just richer. Existential fiction is just richer to me, more true to life, more psychologically acute than other fiction.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And does this also apply to movies that you enjoy?
Absolutely. But I mean, I like action movies. There are many kinds of movies I like that are not existential in nature. Although I would argue that many of the Clint Eastwood movies are very existential. That anti-hero that he often plays is actually a kind of existential hero who sees life's absurdities and just is not a mainstream person. But be that as it may, our favorite movies are the very quiet European or world movies that are existential in nature. We just watched a Moroccan movie the other day called The Blue Caftan, which is about dealing with a cancer diagnosis, real things. So we like entertainment. We like to be diverted, but we also like deep movies that say something.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. And when it comes to podcasts, are there any that you're listening to at the moment?
I don't listen to podcasts, but I do watch YouTube videos of a certain sort. I like physics videos. That probably harks back to my earliest life of enjoying physics and math. And I follow a German astrophysicist named Sabine Hofstadter. She's a very snarky physicist and she's very anti things. And I like her attitude. So I enjoy watching her videos.
Yeah, what do you like about the attitude?
I find that I more believe whistleblowers than the conventional model in every field, whether the field is psychiatry or physics or anything under the sun. I tend not to believe the conventional version, and I believe that the whistleblowers typically are telling the truth, that they're the truth tellers. And so she's a physics whistleblower. She doesn't believe in the standard model of physics, etc. So it's not so much that I like them. I think it's that I believe them. I think they're on the right side of issues, the whistleblowers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And either in your professional life or your personal life, who do you look up to?
I don't really have role models, but the people who are important to me are those people who had to make hard decisions in hard times. And the person who comes to mind for me often is Eisenhower before D-Day. And the kinds of decisions he had to make, like where to drop the paratroopers, knowing that he was going to lose 25,000 paratroopers wherever he dropped them. Whatever decisions he made was going to cost lives. Those people, it's not that I'm impressed by them, and it's not that I don't understand that they had feet of clay also, that they were just real human beings with flaws. I think everyone's flawed. But I respect their decision-making process in those hard times, and we need those people to make those decisions on our behalf in those hard times. So Churchill, FDR, Eisenhower, a lot of those characters around World War II, and that's my time. I was born right after World War II. So those people are most important to me or most impressive to me.
Yeah, for sure. I often think about how difficult these decisions might are, and how I would have reacted in that situation. I don't think I would have made a better decision, and it's really easy for onlookers to criticize, but and some of them are incredibly valid, but it doesn't negate the difficulty in how rigorous that process of decision making is.
Absolutely. There are decisions that get made that have consequences generations in and generations out. This is an aside, but um, the French are still angry with the British over something that happened during World War II. Um, there was a moment where the French fleet was maybe going to be taken over by the Germans. The Germans were approaching the French fleet. And there had been an agreement between the French and the British that the French would sink their ships rather than give them to the Germans. And at the last moment, the French admiral didn't quite want to sink his own ships. So the British admiral had no choice but to sink all the French ships with thousands of sailors aboard. And for French folks of my generation, they're still holding that grudge that the British sank the French Navy. So decisions got made in the matter of minutes there about is this the moment? Can we hold off sinking the French fleet or not? And the British admiral made that decision. Was it right or wrong? Who knows? But it was a decision with consequences that we're still living with.
Yeah, for sure. And my last question for you is there a class or course that you've taken that has stuck with you to this date?
There was when I got my degree in philosophy, then I got a master's degree in creative writing. Then later than that, I completely retooled and got a second undergraduate degree in psychology and a master's in counseling and a doctorate in counseling psychology. So in that undergraduate psychology degree, there was a really lovely guy at my university. Einhorn was his name, and he taught two classes that moved me. One was an abnormal psychology class, and one was a theories of personality class. And that was probably my favorite class in all of college, was just understanding that these were not actual theories, that these were the opinions of different folks. They didn't rise to the level of theory. Freud didn't really create a theory. Jung didn't really create a theory. Adler didn't really create a theory. They had opinions.
Mhm.
But it was very interesting to me to have that laid out, the different ways that different experts or pundits or whatever to call them, thinkers, different ways that they characterize human nature. For instance, just to take one example that I think is very important intellectually, Freud's model is that we develop, easy to say. Jung's model is that we undevelop, that we come into the world whole and become smaller and smaller versions of ourselves. Two very different visions of who we are as human beings. It's not about who's right or who's right or wrong, but that's two very different ways to think about human nature. Do we really develop, or are we absolutely perfect little human beings when we're born and then stuff happens and we get smaller and smaller? I find that interesting.
Yeah, and how's that shaped your life?
Say that again, sorry.
And how has that shaped your life?
Well, it's caused me to ponder human nature. That's why, as I mentioned earlier, my personal theory of personality, about personality being made up of those three parts, that's come out of my reading about and thinking about all the different theories of personality that are out there. And the phrases that come from these different theories resonate for me, like Jung's language around blind spots. I think that's an interesting idea that human beings can be very smart and have gigantic blind spots. Or his idea of the midlife crisis. That's a Jungian idea. The idea that we undevelop, and finally there's a crisis where we don't recognize ourselves and we have to do something. That's the midlife crisis. Adlerian ideas about inferiority complexes and superiority complexes. Good ideas. So I'm not sure how it's all affected me or influenced me, but I've just found it all very interesting. And I keep working in that territory.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing more about yourself. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you a bit better. Now let's move on to the interview section. And for starters, how would you define family?
I probably don't really have a definition of family. If we really think about it in our own lives, I think there are almost concentric circles of family. There are the people who really influence us, who are closest to us, probably usually called the nuclear family, but that can be complicated. So there's that family. And then there's extended family, the folks we see at Thanksgiving or Christmas or kind of hear vaguely about, but don't really count in our psyche too much. So I think for me, a definition of family would be those people who really influence us, most importantly, day in and day out, and even when we've left them, the people whose voices we still hear, people we're still answering to or still concerned about. So that would be the way I would define family, is not in any textbook way, but in terms of those individuals in your life who matter to you the most, who are closest to you in that sense. There can be people who live close to you who don't count much. There may be a sibling in your, let's say there are five kids. There may be two siblings you don't even notice. Maybe they're a little older than you and they're already sort of half out the door. So they're in your family, but they don't really make up your constellation of the people who are influencing you. And I think typically there are only two or three people in a person's most intimate constellation, maybe a father, a mother, and one sibling, that sort of thing, who are really the most influential or count the most in your own vision of life.
Yeah, 100%. And how would you define family functioning?
Well, there are lots of thoughts about systems models and how families function. My Probably my personal idea is that it functions very much tribally. That's probably the best way to think about a family, is that there are leaders and followers and pressures around leading and following. And families function poorly because, unfortunately, inside the family, individual members think of themselves as winning or losing. It's a lot of winning or nobody uses this language internally, but people want to get their own way, which is exactly the same as winning. And everybody has that. Everybody in a family, including the smallest child, has an agenda on getting their own way. So family functioning ends up relating to pressure points and winning and losing and other things that it would be nice if they were absent. It would be nice if our human nature were different and if we weren't so Darwinian, if it wasn't about winning and losing and survival of the fittest. But unfortunately, that's the creature we are. So there are lots of tensions in family just around winning and losing.
Yeah. And what would you say is the importance of having strong family bonds?
It's complicated in the following sense. We know that we have to survive as individuals. That's our first necessity. We enter the world alone, we exit the world alone, and for a lot of people, they're alone throughout their lives in some important sense. They're always alone. So there's no family for them in that sense. By the same token, having that kind of support, having genuine family support where your mother, father, siblings, whomever, uncles, grandparents are on your side makes an enormous difference both in how you feel about life and in your outcomes and in how you turn out. Alice Miller, who wrote interestingly in this subject area, she wrote a book called The Drama of the Gifted Child and other books. She speculated on why Hitler was Hitler, and she thought that he was Hitler primarily because he had not a single person supporting him. And this is, of course, too simple. But then she contrasted him with Picasso, whom she thought had certain tendencies in the direction of complete authoritarianism, but had a father who loved him and who actually physically carried him during an earthquake in Malaga and saved his life. So Picasso had a different experience from Hitler, and Alice Miller is making this distinction between somebody who is completely unsupported and the consequences of that, ending up being that person may end up being a cruel, angry, resentful, difficult person, versus somebody who's been supported at least a little. And there have been lots of social psychological experiments sort of confirming the same idea that if you get no warmth, no support, the technical term is there'll be failure to thrive. That is, children die from lack of touch. So family is providing family at its best is providing all of that warmth, touch, support, and some internal feeling that allows you to get through hard times, that without this experience of warmth and support, it's easy to not pull yourself through the hard times.
Right. And we talked a little bit before about how communication issues can cause a lot of conflict in relationships or in families, but in what ways does effective communication and conflict resolution help in strengthening family bonds?
Well, conflicts matter. Let's start there. When you're in conflict with somebody in your same household whom you're seeing all the time, that grates and many kinds of things happen. Either you end up confronting that person over and over again in little ways, over the dishes or over dirty clothes or over something unimportant. You end up having fights over nothing, or you stay away and you feel estranged from your own family and you, so to speak, don't want to come home. So those conflicts have just everyday real world consequences for folks. So there the external conflict between you and another person in the family, and those have deleterious consequences. But then there are also the internal conflicts where you've taken on somebody in the family's voice, and you're fighting with that person internally. And because I work with creative and performing artists, the following issue comes up for them a lot. It may be their mother or their father who wishes that they're playing concert level piano and not they themselves who want to do it. They've sort of been pushed into it, and now they're in internal conflict between some parental voice who wants them to be continuing and their own desire to do something quite different. So even though that's not a conflict between two people, the performer is not actually fighting with his or her mother, but he's fighting with his or her mother's voice inside. And so that conflict is perturbing. It keeps you upset, keeps you up at night. And they have both kinds of conflicts need to be resolved, both the external conflicts and the internal conflicts, for you to feel at all mentally healthy.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. I mean, if I were to apply this to myself, I was just thinking, as a child, I was told by my parents that crying is not necessary and that it just makes no difference. But I must admit, I am an avid crier. It is not entirely within my control, I think. I'm not sure, but it feels good to cry sometimes. However, every single time I cry, I hear this voice of my mom going like, why are you even crying? This is not useful or productive at all. You need to stop. And it makes me feel a lot worse. Is that,
This is exactly what we're talking about. That's
yeah,
right. This is an unresolved inner conflict. And it's unresolved because you're still hearing that voice. And what one hopes through coaching or therapy or some self help work that you or someone in your position comes to understand that you want to extinguish that voice, that voice is not serving you. And so the simple 3-step process that cognitive therapists teach or use is first to hear what's being said internally, and you hear it. So you can hear that. So that's step one is working, you hear it. Step two is to dispute it. It's to say, no, thank you thought. It's to not accept it. Right now, you're probably still, you don't know what to do with it. So you hear it, and in a sense, you're accepting it because you're not disputing it. So disputatiousness would sound like, no, thank you thought, go away, not interested. And then step three is just the simple idea of replacing that thought with some affirmation, some positive thought, like, I'm perfectly okay, or crying is just fine, or I can't wait to cry some more, or something along those lines where you honor your position and let go of the other positions. I didn't mean to be talking about you, uh, but but that's the 3-step process that kind of all cognitive therapists teach, and that's just hearing what you think, disputing the thoughts that don't serve you, and replacing those thoughts with more productive thoughts.
yeah. And with these internal conflicts, because they do often have some kind of not really attachment, but they are related in some way to an external conflict that hasn't yet been resolved. Is it necessary at all to resolve that external conflict?
It's not about it being necessary or not necessary. It would be lovely to resolve it, but typically it can't be resolved because it's not in your control. And it's even not in your influence typically. There's a distinction to be made between what we can control and what we can influence. Most of life is made up of things we can't control and of things we can't much influence. I put out in cyberspace an authoritarian wound questionnaire some years ago. That is, I invited people who had been harmed in childhood by an authoritarian in the family to take this questionnaire. And this is in answer to your question about external conflict, what really helped them deal with this authoritarian parent now that they were an adult. And the number one answer was getting as far away as possible, getting across the country, getting across the world. In other words, there was nothing to resolve there. There was nothing that could be resolved there because the authoritarian was not going to change 1 inch.
Yeah.
So I'm just
Yeah.
just just pausing there for effect because that's the truth about many of these conflicts. And we know that mantra from AA, which is insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and trying to expecting a different result. We can't just fight with that person over and over again and expect a different result because they are not changing. That isn't to say that there aren't some smart things one might do to try to resolve those conflicts. There are smart things one might do. One might try to enlist an ally and have that ally speak to that person. One might try to have a conversation in a different location rather than always having it in the kitchen. Go out and have a salad and have that conversation someplace else. In other words, there are tactics, but those tactics are not equal to the task of really dealing with a tough, conflictual relationship. That's why so many adult children are estranged from their parents. They're not really dealing with their parents at all because of one of these or multiple unresolved conflicts.
Yeah, 100%. I'd say the same for myself. I think I love my parents dearly. I think they did a fantastic job raising me, supporting me financially and logistically as well, and being there for the big moments. But we just have widely different views politically and emotionally, to the point where it's just not quite feasible for my mental health to live
No,
in
no.
close
We
proximity.
can't
And
even we
it's
can't even
yeah.
make it through Thanksgiving or Christmas often. In 3 minutes, all the old stuff comes up, and we have to, go out the door and take a walk around the block just so we don't start screaming or fighting or whatever. So these are pretty intractable problems, which is why families are typically not doing that well together.
Right, yeah. And sometimes the best thing you can do for a relationship is to get some space as well.
Absolutely, not just some space, but as I said, dramatic space. Get away from the issue and do it without feeling guilty. Because there's a second part to doing this. It's one thing to decide that for one's emotional well-being or mental health, you're not going to deal with somebody in the family. It could be It's a lot of sibling abuse. It could be a sibling. So you don't want to deal with a sibling. So A is understanding that it's perfectly permissible to not deal with that person, and B is to then not feel guilty about your decision. And B is important as A because those feelings of guilt they're also emotionally wearing and drain us and reduce our ability to face life. So not only do you want to be able to say to yourself, I'm not seeing my folks, it's not good for me, it's not safe for me, and I'm not feeling guilty about that. It's hard for people to arrive at that place, but that's a place where a lot of people need to get to. I'm not seeing this difficult person and I'm not feeling guilty about it.
Yeah. And overall, what are the key communication skills that are essential or really good for strong family relationships?
Well, there are lots, of course, but I have a little simple ABC rule that I teach, and that's to be affirmative, brief, and clear. And I think that's a good rule to follow. To try to come from to try not to be critical, even if you are criticizing, to try not to sound critical, to find your ways of using language so you're not sounding critical, so that you're more affirmative than critical. As I said, to keep things brief, because the longer you go, the more you're disempowering yourself. So to keep things brief and to actually say what's on your mind, to not sort of change the subject or make it be about something else when it's really about some core lack of respect or some essential thing that's going on that you're a little bit afraid to address, and so it becomes about something else. So that's one simple rule, an ABC rule, to be affirmative, brief, and clear.
Yeah. And how would you describe the role of relationship coaching in a family's communication in conflict resolution?
Well, we need to step back a second and distinguish it from some other things that it might sound like. It might sound like couples counseling or family therapy or marriage therapy or marriage counseling. All of those other things typically require that all of the contestants in the battle show up, that the couple shows up or the whole family shows up. Relationship coaching is different. You can just work with an individual on relationship coaching on their relationship issues without the other people in the family or in the couple or in the business, if it's business coaching, needing to be there. So that's a big difference, and it makes it much easier for the coach to acquire clients because it's very hard for coaches, therapists to get both people into the room or especially get whole families in the room. It's very difficult to do that. People don't really want to go down that route of showing up like that. So relationship coaching is typically about working with one individual on his or her relationship issues. Those issues get identified. And then there are lots of tactics and strategies like role playing in session. To take a simple example, if your client wants to say something to her husband and is afraid to say it, you might role play that situation. I would be the husband and she would be herself. And it's not that I would know what her husband would say, but I can ask her to put words in my mouth and we could go back and forth. And essentially, it's a version of rehearsing. So, one of the things that relationship coaches do is rehearse difficult situations. And for a lot of my clients, it's not about familial things. It's not about husbands and wives and families. It's about marketplace folks. It's about relating to a literary agent or a manager or a curator or a gallery owner or a director. Because as I say, I work typically mostly with creative and performing artists. So a lot of my relationship coaching has to do with those kinds of relationships where my client is always feeling one down to the other person. There's always that one downness. The other person has the power. Whether it's a literary agent or a publisher or a director, whoever it is, the other person has the power. So a lot of the relationship coaching is just trying to normalize that these are two human beings who who hopefully can be at the same level. So that's just a piece of what relationship coaching is about. But as I say, for me, a lot of it has to do with marketplace players and relating in a business world.
Yeah. And how effective has this been for your clients? What is the main distinguisher that, allows them to move forward with communication when they've done this role playing activity versus, the internal argument that they have in their heads?
Well, the main thing is that they bravely say what they need to say to the people to whom they need to speak. And so the markers of success, well, in coaching, one of the hallmarks of coaching is that you co-create goals with clients and then you monitor those goals. So let's say that a client's goals, let's say she's a painter and wants representation by some gallery somewhere, that's the goal. The marker is that she walks in cold to that gallery and pitches herself. That would be proof that the relationship coaching is working, that she's rehearsed her pitch, that she's brave enough to walk in there, that she can tolerate the gallery owner saying, I don't talk to artists off the street, go away. You have to tolerate criticism. One of my books is Toxic Criticism, and one of the things we have to tolerate in life, in relationships, is both on point criticism and also inadvertent criticism. Sometimes it's not meant as criticism, but we still take it that way. But there's also a lot of meant criticism, that the message received is the message sent. So in life, we're much more thin-skinned than we ought to be. We take things in too easily, especially with my clients, creative and performing artists. They may hear something that's actually neutral or even a little bit of praise, but it's still not praise enough, so they take it as criticism. And then they cost themselves a long amount of time before they're willing to try again in relationships. So that's just a part of the puzzle. Is that, well, let me say it the other way around, and that is probably the top marker that the relationship coaching is working is that they're actually meeting the goals they themselves have co-created with me.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of people on Shark Tank would benefit from that.
A lot of
Um,
people wear,
on Shark Tank. It's this reality TV show about
oh, the Shark Tank,
business. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. But at the
Yes.
start of, yeah, sorry.
No, I'm just going to agree. I've only glancingly seen it, but I think I understand what it is.
Yeah, it's just that, sometimes there are a few candidates that come up with these interesting pitches, but just not very feasible in a business sense, or for enough for an investor to make that investment. And there are a few candidates that have been really adamant about it, being like, no, like, you don't understand this, and I'm not walking away from this mat until you invest in my company. And boy, I can feel the nervousness, and I don't think I would have I don't think I myself would perform any better. But it is it's definitely one of those things where you really have to build that confidence and be
You
okay with
do,
the
and
rejection.
just to piggyback on your thought there, you may or may not know that the world's number one phobia is public speaking. people are more afraid of saying 3 sentences than getting on a plane or spiders or snakes or anything under the sun. Saying those 3 sentences is so hard for a huge portion of the human race, which is interesting. What is so dangerous about that? Hard to know. It goes to a very ancient archetypal place that speaking those 3 sentences should be so difficult. So I did a book called Redesign Your Mind, and the idea of it was cognitive therapy teaches a certain sort of thing, namely how to handle or manage your thoughts. I thought it might be a nice idea to go a little deeper and imagine changing the source of your thoughts so that you wouldn't have to arm wrestle each individual thought, but you'd have new thoughts. And so the idea of the book is to picture your mind as an actual room that you get to redesign and redecorate. You get to do things like put in windows so a breeze blows through and do all kinds of things like that. And one of the features of this redesigned mind was to create a speaker's corner in your mind, like the one in Hyde Park in London. And there are other speaker's corners around the world where people were allowed to say whatever was on their mind without fear of reprisal. We need that speaker's corner in our own mind. We need a place where we can safely say things to ourselves. Most people can't say things to other people, but they can't even say them to themselves. They can't tell them. They're not transparent to themselves. It's called defensiveness. People are, in fact, defensive. They want to wall off their own information from themselves. They don't want to know what's going on inside. So we need to do a better job of knowing that. That's why I created this idea of an internal speaker's corner. But this just circles all the way back to what we're talking about um, how difficult it is for people to own the room or own the Shark Tank studio or just own that. This is my space. Get out of my way. This is my space. It's hard for people to do that. They can train to do it. They can get better at it. But a lot of even the super top performers never got over their performance anxiety. Never. Pavarotti, the opera singer, never got over his performance anxiety. Carly Simon. I could name 5 trillion well-known, high-profile actors, musicians, mimes, clowns, who they're white-knuckling life. They're doing their work, they're doing their art, but while anxious, while scared. It's too bad. But it's such a deep-seated challenge that people sometimes just have to live their life that way, meeting their challenges while anxious.
Yeah. I wonder if part of that is because some of these high profile actors or performers just don't have that extra time to sit down and really go through the process of, um, gaining that confidence.
That doesn't seem to be enough. These are confident people uh, who nevertheless have performance anxiety. And I think there are lots of reasons for that. And one is this is where the existential wellness coaching comes in, or where those ideas come in. The problem is that these performances matter to them. And as soon as something matters to us, the dynamic completely changes and we get anxious. We could, in our day job, spend, $3 million of our employer's budget. We don't care. Yeah, it's their money, $3 million, who cares? Then we go home and we try to find the last word for our poem, and we're completely anxious because we can't find a word. It's kind of crazy that this big deal thing produces no anxiety in us, and this small thing, finding a word, produces so much anxiety, but it's because our day job doesn't matter and the poem does matter. This is our internal representation of what matters. And you can't really say to yourself, well, let me have it not matter. Because as soon as you say that, then you've lost the motivational juice to do the thing. You don't actually want to be saying, this doesn't matter. You want to be saying, so for me, and I try to train clients in this, it's a dance of attachment and detachment. You want both things in life. You want to attach, you want to care, you want to be hungry to get work done. At the same time, you have to let go of outcomes. You have to detach from it. Has to be okay that you have a bad performance. That's so hard for performers to hear, that it's okay to have a bad performance. But it has to be, because only a percentage of our work is going to be excellent. Some larger percentage is going to be ordinary, and some percentage is going to be bad. That's just the reality of process. And folks understand this intellectually when I talk them through it. They just don't like it. They don't like it that not everything's going to be excellent. They just don't like it.
Yeah. Do you think it's maybe a bit of that overt perfectionism?
Well, for me, perfectionism is an anxiety state, and it's a certain kind of anxiety around um, failing, not meeting one's own standards. We could call it perfectionism, but it's closer to um, being unhappy at producing less than excellent work. It's about excellence rather than perfectionism. I don't think that it's quite that high to all the way to perfectionism, but it is all the way to excellence. People, my clients, most creative performing artists, even though they know better, want everything they do to be excellent, even though they know that that can't happen. And I give them tons of examples. Bach wrote 200 cantatas, 15 of which are excellent, and 185 of which are ordinary. Does that make him a bad composer? No. Beethoven's first, third, fifth, seventh, and ninth symphonies are supposedly better than his second, fourth, sixth, and eighth. Does that make the second bad or the fourth bad? No. But people have to really buy into this understanding that mediocre work or ordinary work is okay as long as your body of work is sufficient. You're looking at your life over time, not at this one song that you're trying to write. This one song may or may not work. What you want is your body of work to work. You want to be able to step back and have a broader perspective on what you're doing.
Yeah. And this may seem not very relevant to what we're talking about today, but I think it ties in really nicely to familial relationships and how it's not perfect all the time, and how a lot of us tend to avoid conflict because we're afraid of the imperfect outcomes. If we ignore it, it remains stagnant and untouched, and it's seemingly fine.
That's gigantic. Let me just give you a classic example to piggyback on what you're saying. A wife may despise her marriage, but know that she'll end up in poverty if she gets a divorce. So, terrible marriage, poverty, these are not easy choices. And it's really hard to decide to put yourself into poverty. It's hard to make that decision. And it turns out to be easier to stay put, which is not a great outcome. It's not a great outcome to be stuck in this terrible marriage, but poverty feels worse. And way back when I did a podcast interview series. I was the host on a podcast series of folks who were sort of high-powered professionals in different professions, and I was asking them questions, existential questions about what was meaningful to them and what have you, and had they ever experienced a large meaning loss in life. And every one of them had. There was a period in their life where something they were doing stopped being meaningful. For one nun, it was she no longer believed in God or in her faith. There was that. For a tenured professor, he no longer believed in his subject matter and wanted out of the university. So these were big moments in these people's lives. But here's the headline. Even though they knew they were going to have to make a change, they knew it was coming, that there was no doubt in their mind that they had to leave the religious order or leave the university. They knew it was coming. It on average took them a full 5 years to make the change. That's a long time to be stuck. And I think that's a very interesting observation about human nature, that even when we know for a fact, for a certainty, somewhere in our soul that we're going to make a change, that change can prove so hard to make that it takes us an inordinate amount of time to make that change. My mantra for these folks or for this situation is sooner rather than later. It's a very simple idea. If you know you're going to make this change, try to settle down and face the fact that you're going to make this change. Most people can't. They need their hand held. This is where coaching comes in. They need their hand held through this really difficult transition.
Yeah. And what do you think individuals and families should take into account when considering relationship coaching?
Well, because relationship coaching doesn't require other people entering the room with you, what you don't have to take into account is whether your husband is willing to come in also, or whether your whole family is willing to come in also. So you don't have to take that into account. That idea that coming in alone is somehow not enough. It is enough. So that's one upside of coaching. I think also you have to, yeah, what one of the things to think through is, do you want to just chat about things, or do you want to do you intend to take action? Are you willing to take action or not? One of the little secrets of therapy is that it's okay to just keep talking about things week in and week out, and the client is not really there's no demand on the client to make a change, which is a funny thing, but that's one of the truths of therapy, is that there can be an ongoing repetitive conversation about this. It doesn't work for coaches. That's not what coaching is about. Coaching, there's a demand that you tell me what you intend to do, and then I'm going to check to see if you did it. So it's good to enter coaching with that clarity that I'm going to be asked to do things, and not only and someone's going to check in on me as to whether I did those things. So if you're really coming to talk, then that may be a reason to go to somebody other than a coach, a pastoral counselor or a therapist or somebody else where you can just talk. That would be one of the differences in how you make a decision about where you want to go with your problem or challenge or issue. Is if you're on the cusp of acting, coaching is superb. If secretly you don't want to make a change, it's not really the right place to be.
Yeah, that's a huge distinguisher between coaching and therapy. But now let's move on to the practices and habits section. So, what are some habits that you'd recommend practicing in order to strengthen family bonds?
Ceremonies and rituals.
Oh,
It's nice.
habits in you were saying your answer was ceremonies and rituals.
That's one of my
Okay.
answers. Yes.
Sorry, I thought you were asking.
No,
Okay,
no.
let me
What's
just
it?
yeah, okay, great.
I think we're good. We can just go on.
Yeah.
That was fun. No, I think one of the habits to create or acquire is for the creation of family ceremonies and rituals. Um, my older daughter has 3 children. She and her wife ask their children every day, "What's one good thing that happened today?" I don't know if that's their language exactly, but something like that. That kind of check in on something nice or good that happened on that day. That's a family bonding and building kind of ceremony or activity to engage in. There are lots of those practical kinds of things. W- Families can create a travel journal together when they travel so that they have a collective memory of that moment. There are all kinds of tactics and practical things that can happen. Typically, somebody has to take charge of that. Somebody has to take that on their own shoulders to create the ritual and make sure that it happens at the same time each day or what have you. And you can't typically pass that off to somebody else, because if you're the one it popped into your mind to do it, then now it's on your shoulders to do it. But probably the biggest, I'm not sure if it's a habit exactly to call it, but the biggest desirable trait in a family is basic respect. There's nothing like respect. If there's a lack of respect, there's like nothing else positive going on. So to call respect a habit is an odd way to say it, but I think keep using supportive language, using language that honors the other people in the family, even while you're disagreeing, or even if you are disagreeing, to say, it's not just I love you. but I respect you. I really disagree. I'll give you an example. Maybe it's off target, but I'll give you an example. There's kind of a fundamental difference, distinction between people who believe in Western medicine and people who believe in alternative medicine. Some people believe in both and have some way of marrying them, but a lot of people have separate beliefs. They believe in one or the other. Well, let's say you're the husband and your wife comes home with a cancer diagnosis and only wants to do alternative medicine treatment. That's hard because if your true belief is, please do Western medicine, if that's your true belief, you're going to fight with her. You're going to arm wrestle about this. But hopefully from a place of respecting her beliefs around alternative medicine. That is, if you don't respect that, that's going to come through and she's not going to hear you. But if it comes through that you're respecting her belief system, but you disagree, that's something else. Then you can have a conversation. And these are the real life, super important places where respect matters. Because without respect, the other person is just going to shut down and not hear. Even if you have something smart to say, even if you just read the best new cancer prognosis, whatever, so they're still not going to listen if they believe that you're not respecting their position.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, Eric. It's been such a pleasure talking to you about this, and I've learned so much from you. It was such an engaging conversation for me. But now let's move on to the open mic section, and this is your chance to talk about anything that you wish to talk about, that you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So I can see the grin on your face. The flow is-
Anything I want to talk about, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Freedom of too many possibilities. Well, I think the place I would like to chat about is I do a lot of writing and thinking in what's called critical psychology or critical psychiatry, or sometimes called anti-psychiatry. And it's a branch of thinking where we disagree with the idea that psychiatry actually diagnoses and treats mental disorders. We believe that it's more a labeling game than real medicine. And that this is especially true where it comes to kids, that there are millions and millions and millions of kids being labeled certain ways that are called a diagnosis and that are followed up with pills, with chemicals, when in fact it might be developmental delay or natural difference or what have you. So what I would like to do, this is separate from inviting people to learn about my world, but I would like to invite people to learn about a series that I'm the lead editor on, and that's the Ethics International Press Critical Psychology and Critical Psychiatry series. We've put out 5 books so far. We have another one coming out called Institutionalized Madness. We just did one on deconstructing ADHD. It's a very rich and robust series for anybody who has some doubts about what psychiatry does or what the 2 Bibles of diagnosing do. There's the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, that's the American Bible, and then the World Bible is the International Classification of Diseases, the ICD. Those 2 books, the DSM and the ICD, are where everybody gets their diagnostic criteria. We don't believe in them. And we invite folks who are interested in what I'm talking about to come visit this series that I just mentioned and take a peek and hear lots of other voices who have something else to say different from the mainstream views.
All right, that's wonderful. That's a great use of the open mic. So Eric, where can we find these books if we are interested in having a look?
Yeah,
through?
there's a drop down at my website. My website is ericmaisel.com, and there's a tab called Books, and under that you'll find Ethics International Press, and that's where you can learn all about those books. And in that under that same tab, you can learn about my other 50 or 60 books.
Fantastic. We'll link those in the show notes. Thank you once again, Eric, for spending your time with us today and for sharing your expertise as well. It's been really valuable. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Altogether, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by the Family Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at fa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.